It's now 8:20 p.m. We're out in north end of Chico here, and we're looking at the park fire. Park fire's been burning for about 5 hours. In the first 2 hours, it burned about 2.5 miles. In the next hour, it burned probably another mile and a half, and then around 7:45, it crossed Cohasset Road. So Cohasset Road was about 6 or 7 miles from the origin. And once it got to around Richardson Springs, at first it was moving in grass and blue oak and just kind of running in grass and didn't have a huge column on it. But once it got around Richardson Springs, it was into heavy live oak and gray pine and foothill kind of scrub. And then that's when it really exploded. So the fire went from being kind of a wind-driven fire at that point to being a heat-driven fire. And it's punched up this huge column. It really punched up the column around 5 o'clock when it got up, between, we're looking out here at Sycamore Creek, and it kind of goes Bidwell Park, then there's a small little creek, and then you have Sycamore Creek, then some more smallish creeks, and then you get to Mud Creek and Richardson Springs. And Mud Creek actually goes all the way up through Cohasset to the top of Cohasset, the community. So once it got past Richardson Springs and into Mud Creek, then it's kind of been aligned to kind of blow up the canyon towards Cohasset. And once it crossed Cohasset Road, I'm not sure whether or not they're still able to get cars down from Cohasset for evacuation. There was a lot of evacuation going on around 5:30, 6 o'clock. And now the fire's really just, as you can see from the cloud, it's just really massive. In the back, you can see here, up in the canyon, you can see there's what we call backing fire coming down in the grasslands. And so this fire ran with a really kind of skinny footprint, straight downwind, basically to the northwest. And what happens then is that the head of the fire's moved extremely fast, but the sides, the flanks of the fire, they move a lot slower. And so what we're seeing right now is the fire backing down towards town.
Repeat what fire it is.
This is the park fire we're looking at outside of Chico, California. And we can see some torching up on the ridge up here, and we can see a steady line of fire burning where the grass is burning behind me. So for fire effects, what we're going to get, where the head of the fire's blasting and where we have this huge column, we're going to have really hot fire effects in the brush where everything's killed and black. But on the flanks of the fire here, like what's going on behind us, it's kind of a gentle burn, and even though it's really dry, it's going to burn through the grass, and a lot of the oak trees are going to be surviving. What we saw early in the day was that as the fire blasted up out of Bidwell Park, it started at Alligator Hole, just about right at the power lines. As it blasted out of there, they bombed that flank on the kind of north rim down to the park road on either side really hard with tankers. Kind of right off the bat, kind of when we saw it around 4:30, it was kind of holding there. So we don't really know how far it's gone up canyon towards, say, Bear Hole, Salmon Hole, and farther up the canyon. We'll have some mapping, I'm sure, later tonight or in the morning of where the fire is. But for now, the fire really ran in a skinny kind of feather shape from Bidwell Park, and now it's crossed Cohasset Road. So they were trying hard they got a lot of engines early on right to Bidwell Park, and then they turned a lot of those around because there wasn't anything for them to do there. A lot of them went behind us up through Bidwell Ranch on the city property, and then a ton of the incoming engines went to Richardson Springs to do structure protection. So they had a structure protection group set up at Richardson Springs before the fire got there, but they didn't have really any time to prep at the hotel itself. The head of the fire just kind of went just east of Richardson Springs, but it hit there pretty hard. From there, it's only a mile or mile and a half to Cohasset Road. And as I said, the fire really started to kind of be heat dominated and pushing hard, more up into the heavy brush that you see when you go up the road to Cohasset. So where it crossed Cohasset Road was a Jackrabbit Flat, which is about halfway up the main grade as you climb up into Cohasset. But this ice cap you see out here, that's the ice cap that you see is, that's a sign of that it's getting up into the upper atmosphere, and also of all the moisture that's being cooked off by this living vegetation out here. They were trying hard to get engines into Cohasset for structure protection around 6 p.m. And once the fire burns across the road, it's kind of an open question of how passable the road will be. The fire's kind of, when you're going up the grade in the Cohasset, where it first crossed, there's big road cuts there, and the fire kind of spotted across the road, so it's not clear that necessarily it's going to close the road right away. But as you get up closer to Cohasset, kind of pulling off the grade, as you start to get into the heavy brush and the road starts to flatten out, once the fire gets up in there, it may close access on the road. So they might be stuck with whatever resources they've gotten up there already as far as protecting Cohasset. So at that point, there's probably a lot of people still in Cohasset. There wasn't really a lot of time from the time that the evacuations went from warning to mandatory. There was only a window of a couple of hours for people to get out of Cohasset. So there's likely still a lot of people in Cohasset, and the open question is whether or not they'll be able to get people down out of there, because Cohasset has no secondary access that's paved. There's dirt logging roads to go out the top and make their way back to Highway 32 eventually, but there's no secondary paved access roads out of Cohasset. So that's long been a kind of known real problem for Cohasset, and now just judging by the cloud we got here and everything else, a lot of people are probably going to be trapped up in Cohasset for quite a while. In the brush and grass, where the fire goes past the road, it may cool off quick enough that they can then get people back in, but there's a lot of, as you move farther up the hill, there's heavier fuel. There was a lot of work done to do a big fuel break and prescribed burn in Cohasset over the past, they've been planning it for a couple of years. They burned a lot of it last year. That likely is not going to do anything to stop this fire just because of the wind and the lack of time to prep.
Repeat where you are.
I'm standing here at the north end of Chico. We're watching the fire burn down, kind of back down towards town. We're looking over Bidwell Ranch. We're at the end of the Hancock Park neighborhood. Chico, California. Watching the fire back down. And so that fire, as far as we'll get to Chico, right behind us is a huge irrigation canal that makes a great fire break. We don't know really what the strategy is going to be for containing this side of the fire, but right now it's backing down, and it'll be down to the base here fairly shortly. And what else to say? Do you have any questions, producer?
People are saying there's another fire on the Pence Road right now. Or
yeah, the grapevine was all torching right there. I think it's gonna start backing down probably.
So what we saw today on the initial attack was just that they had a lot of tankers on this fire, but then fairly quickly the fire was into the drainage behind us, burned up out of Bidwell Park, burned down into this next drainage that's kind of behind us over here to the right, just north of North Rim, and that was taking a lot of effort. They had 2 helicopters and 4 to 6 air tankers, and then for a real critical 15-minute, 20-minute period, they thought that there was a drone flying, and the air attack took all the heavy tankers out of action and basically had them run some laps up higher until they could confirm whether or not there was a drone. Some of the planes were getting low on fuel, so they sent those 4 planes back to the Chico airport. So that was a real critical juncture in the fire, and during that time, the fire, it may or may not have already been gone off to the races, but at that critical juncture, they lost most of their heavy air support, and by the time they got them back in there, it seemed that the momentum was really lost from catching the fire quickly here in this next drainage. The problem with this terrain behind us is there's not a lot of great options for fighting the fire, direct attack. It's a lot like Bidwell Park. So if you know Bidwell Park, you know that it's this craggy, steep canyon, and what's north of that is just a smaller version. So these similarly craggy, small canyons that are very rocky, and there's not really any good roads that can traverse that. There's the power lines that kind of traverse that whole area, and the fire really just paralleled the high voltage power lines straight from the park up to Cohasset Road. But there's no country there where there's kind of advantageous places to put in fire line, and the fire's been spotting, so it's been hopscotching and really What's going to happen tonight is every night we get a downslope flow of wind off these hills, and in the middle of the night it's really strong. So the fire's going to push down towards town, and in the morning when you wake up in Chico, you'll be smelling a lot of smoke. A lot of electricity right now is going to come into town overnight. Overnight there's likely going to be firefighting out here. They might fire the other side of this levee, but unless they've already, they might already be pushing bulldozer lines out here at the base of the slope, but I kind of doubt that. So they're going to have to deal with this flank tonight. Tomorrow the winds will start to blow back away from town, kind of mid-morning. But overnight, this whole open flank on the south is going to make moves down the hill. Right now they've got some helicopters on it, and they'll probably have night helicopters on it. But when we talk about 7 miles of flank, that's a lot of work for multiple helicopters. What I'm looking at right now is looking up towards Forest Ranch, and we see a line of fire way up the canyon there, and it's hard to tell exactly where that is, if that's still on this side of Chico Creek or whether it is. But the problem is just that we've got a lot of open fire line all around, and we've got a lot of firefighters, but even so, we've got poor access and no real coordinated strategy right now where the control box is going to be. So overnight, as the fire behavior calms down, they're going to be trying to work out a strategy of where they can concentrate their efforts, how they can keep it out of Cohasset. They're also going to have to deal with it on this side coming down towards Chico. Most of Chico's in pretty good shape as far as the margins of town and where fire can actually get into the city. So I'd say my biggest worry right now is not about the fire coming down and spreading wildly through Chico. It's more about people trapped in Cohasset and the up canyon side of the fire potentially impacting Forest Ranch over the next several days.
Okay. You want to ask for questions?
Yeah, I can take a couple questions. I'm going to be traveling, so we'll do a follow-up tonight once we get a perimeter, but I'll be out of pocket a little bit as far as follow-up coverage tomorrow, but we'll be following this closely because we live right here.